It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Unhappy Hour live sports radio show on thenewamericanmedia.com. Here is your host, Brian Engelman.
Welcome back. Happy Friday, everybody. Thank you again for sticking around and joining us on the Unhappy Hour, the Cleveland-centric sports show that gets into everything that you're thinking about. We are joined with our special co-host for today's segment and a regular contributor to us here at thenewamericanmedia.com, NBA scout and lifelong Cleveland sports fan, Zak Baris. Zak, we kind of left things off there. We were talking about how now agents are telling their players Cleveland is a good place to go. They develop their talent. It's a good situation. The owner cares. There's some sort of stability. The crowd gets behind you when you have a decent product. It's actually a good spot to land as a young player. So let's talk about the NBA draft. What do you think is going to happen in the top 5 picks?
Number 1, I'd be shocked to see Anthony Davis not go number 1 overall. So he's going number 1 overall to the Hornets. I'm sorry. Number 2, from what I understand, the Bobcats really, really like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. He's going number 2. Number 3 to the Wizards is where it starts to get interesting. Do they take Brad Beal or Thomas Robinson at 3? For the Cavs' sake, you would hope they take Thomas Robinson so the Beal will fall to 4th to Cavs, because the Cavs really like Brad Beal.
Okay.
That's where it starts to get interesting. Honestly, I think they're going to select Beal at 3. Let's say the Wizards select Beal at 3. Thomas Robinson then falls to the Cavs. The Cavaliers then have the choice of Thomas Robinson, undersized power forward who's about 6'8", and you drafted Tristan Thompson last year to play the 4. If you move Thompson to the 5, who's only 6'9", 6'10", if you move Thompson to the 5 and have Thomas Robinson to the 4, you have a very undersized front court, very athletic but very undersized. The Cavaliers also have the option of taking Harrison Barnes at that pick, who I think could thrive with a point guard like Kyrie Irving because he does have problems creating his own shot. But you don't need him creating his own shot in Cleveland. You have a point guard to help you with that. You're going to have a superstar point guard, to help maximize his potential. So I think Harrison Barnes is a good fit in Cleveland. I look at it, too, as another player they could reach for. I actually don't know if it's a reach, is Jeremy Lamb, who I really like out of UConn. He's 6'6", big shooting guard. Has a little bit of that Reggie Miller type in him. I don't know if he'd ever be able to be that good, but, he does have a lot of potential. He's a very good player. And then the one pick that really, really worries me is Andre Drummond. The Cavaliers feel they need a big-time center, and want to roll the dice. I personally, if I'm the Cavaliers, I think you can get a solid player. It might not have the ceiling as Andre Drummond, but you're going to have a solid player that's going to make your team better for years. Rather than taking a guy like Drummond who could set back your franchise a couple of years, I don't think the Cavs have time for a guy like Drummond.
Okay, well, talk about centers that Cleveland has drafted before. You look at Zydrunas Ilgauskas. He had
Chris Mims.
Well, Zydrunas especially, though. He started off, he had talent, but he was bugged by injuries, and then he developed into a very solid, steady, that was, you think about LeBron James down in Miami the past couple of years. He hasn't had somebody 7-foot-something, always tipping in those follow-throughs, always there to grab the rebounds and stuff. Zydrunas turned out to be a very consistent, maybe not elite, but a very consistent player that ended up in an all-star game. But you're saying this Drummond scares you way too much because he could flop so bad.
He could be, like I said, he could be the next Amari Stoudemire type guy, or he can be just a player who's going to give you 10 minutes off the bench every night and, average a couple points a game. That's what worries me about him. I just don't think, I think the Cavaliers have a lot better options at 4 who they can take. I really do. I believe Thomas Robinson's a good option. I do like Barnes and Lamb, even though some people think Lamb might be a reach there. I personally don't. I don't think he's too far off from Brad Beal. I really, he could wind up being a better NBA player than Beal, possibly. I don't know if he will. Depends what kind of situation Beal winds up in. But Jeremy Lamb, I would not be disappointed if the Cavaliers selected Lamb or Barnes at 4. And then at number 5, I see Thomas Robinson, who I think the Cavaliers will likely pass on if he's there. Will fall to number 5 to the Kings, and then 6, I think you see Andre Drummond go to Portland.
To replace their big man that went down.
Yes.
With another questionable pick. Didn't they draft Sam Bowie?
Yeah. Here's the thing. I still don't believe that the Greg Oden was a questionable pick. Had he been healthy, I think he would have been the league's best center. I truly do. He was that skilled, and don't forget when he was playing as Ohio State, at Ohio State his freshman year.
He looked great.
He was playing with a brace on his wrist all year. He wasn't shooting properly, and he still had a huge year.
He looked very good.
He was a force. He was an absolute force for them. And everyone knew Kevin Durant was going to be great. That was the thing. Everyone knew he was going to be very, very good. No one knew he was going to be as good as he is now. But at the time, if you still look at where Durant is now, and you look at Greg Oden's potential at the time, you could still make the case for taking Greg Oden number one at that point, because centers like that in the NBA just don't come along that often anymore. Dwight Howard's the only truly elite center in the NBA, and then you have the fall off of Andrew Bynum's good, but Andrew Bynum lacks a complete motor and hustle. That's the problem with him. He takes plays off.
Is that
you don't have the Patrick Ewings anymore, the Hakeem Olajuwons of the league.
Why is that?
The Alonzo Mournings.
Yeah, but why is that? Why would you say that is, Zach? I find it interesting because anyone who's anyone, whether it's Yao Ming coming over from China or all the Europeans that are coming into the league, anyone who's anyone with size and talent is making their way over here. Why would you say there are less dominant big men today, when the league is kind of in a better financial position than it ever has been, and people of that size are finding out, hey, I can go for this and make some money if I'm good at it? It seems kind of strange to me.
It's just the game has changed. The center is no longer the complete focal point of the offense anymore, like it used to be back in the 80s and 90s. The center used to be the key piece of the offense. Now it's a point guard driven league. Back in the 80s and 90s, you would have never seen point guards of this caliber in the league. There weren't Chris Paul, Steve Nash's, Kyrie Irving's, Derrick Rose's at the time. You had some very good point guards. Mark Price is a very good point guard, but I don't even think Mark Price could keep up with a guy like that anymore. It's just the league is just run differently now. It's a faster league now. You don't have the slow centers that sit underneath the basket and that are constantly very physical. It's a different kind of league. I think that's why. And a lot of the centers nowadays are they have different skill sets. They're not great around the rim. You don't see anyone shooting hook shots anymore. It's just the game has evolved into something else, and now I think it's more of a point guard driven league than it used to be. It used to be dominated by big men, by the centers. It just isn't like that anymore.
So you would say the most important position then, it's just like in football. It's really hard to do anything without a good quarterback or middle linebacker, to anchor that side of the line. Are you saying if you were building a team, the first thing you would go for, position-wise, would be the point guard position because that's the type of league that it is? And if so,
and it depends. If a player like LeBron is coming along, though, I'm going to take LeBron. LeBron's that game changer. Well, because LeBron has the ability to play point guard. That's why I say that. But if it came down to it, if it came down to me taking a power forward or an elite starting point guard, a Chris Paul caliber, or a Deron Williams or Kyrie Irving or Derrick Rose, I'm going to take the point guard every time, because the point guard sets up shots for all of his players. He sets everyone up and runs the offense. I think that's the biggest key to it nowadays. Look at LeBron. I mean, this is his 9th year in the league. If he does not win a championship this year, he has not had he's never played with a true point guard his entire career. When you look at it, I'm not blaming anyone but LeBron for not winning a ring. But when you look at it, though, you still have to go and, there's no reason that guy should not have a ring at this point. But look who his point guards have been since he's been in the league. Eric Snow, Jeff McGinnis, Kevin Ollie, Mo Williams, Mario Chalmers. I know I'm skipping over a few here.
Well, when you put it that way.
I'm just trying to give you the point is he's never played with anything remotely to even a good point guard. Mo Williams was not bad, but Mo Williams is a two guard. He's not a point guard. Right. Look how he thrived this year off the bench and coming for the Clippers. He is a two guard, a solid two guard coming off the bench. That's what he is. He would have been a solid two guard starting for the Cavs. We just lacked a pure point guard, and they never had that. It's why if the Cavaliers have been able to make the trade to get Tywan Lawson a few years ago from the Timberwolves, that when Denver is able to swing that deal, it would have been completely different. Cavaliers would have had that true point guard in Lawson, and who knows what would have happened. But that's why I think LeBron doesn't have a ring. Back in the day, if you don't have either an elite center or an elite point guard, it's very hard to win a championship. Kobe never played against an elite point guard, but he had Shaquille O'Neal to win 3 rings with, and then he won with Gasol and Bynum. He had the most powerful front court in the league for 2 years in a row, and if they won 2 championships over there again, that's why look at Boston. Boston's only won 1 championship with the Big 3 or Big 4, however you want to put it, with Rondo, but Rondo is a complete point guard. He's not going to give you a ton of points. He's not a great shooter, but he runs the offense. He sets everyone's shot up for them. it made Ray Allen, it made Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett better. They would not have won that championship without Rajon Rondo.
You are correct, and I'll tell you what, we're going to take our quick commercial break. We're going into our last segment here. If you are out there listening and want to communicate with us, go ahead and join us on Skype. We are at TNAM Radio. You can also send us a direct message on Twitter. We're at American_media_. When we get back, we're going to kind of open it up. We'll take your calls, see what you're thinking about, and I got to talk about this Justin Combs story. I'm not sure if you followed this or not, but it's been kind of burning my skin since I caught wind of it today, and I got to get this off my chest. We can also talk Browns, OTAs, Indians, whatever else is on your mind. One more break. We are going to be right back here on the Unhappy Hour on the NewAmericanMedia.com.
You were listening to the Unhappy Hour Sports Radio Show on the NewAmericanMedia.com.
Have you ever considered adopting a pet to be part of your family? Our animal companions can be just as close to us as our human companions. If you're considering adoption, please visit your local shelter and adopt a pet today. Shelter pets make the best pets.
Agree to disagree. Yeah, it's a radio show we have on thenewamericanmedia.com every single Friday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Join the show. What do we talk about? Politics, religion, and spirituality. Basically anything you're not supposed to talk about in a bar. You're not supposed to have these conversations inside of a bar, but we have them every single Friday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific on thenewamericanmedia.com. Join the show, offer your opinion, and let's agree to disagree, but let's have a good conversation.
Follow the NewAmericanMedia.com on Twitter at American_media_.
Hi, Brian from the NewAmericanMedia.com. Last year I had this idea. I wanted to start a website of my own, not just a presence on Twitter, a presence on Facebook, and have a thing. I wanted a website. I wanted a home base for all of the ideas and things I'm interested in. I wanted live radio. I wanted to communicate with the globe. I was tired of being spoon-fed dogma by corporate interests and just, here, believe this, believe this. I said, no, I think there's something underneath the surface, but I didn't know how to do it. So I contacted Ted Distel of DistelDesign.com. Ted walked us through the process of, okay, you want videos, you want to do quotes of the day, you want to have a spiritual section, you want to have a 1984 watch where government's intruding and private corporations are intruding into your privacy. Yeah, those are the things that I was interested in. Ted walked me through the process. We built thenewamericanmedia.com, and I encourage you to go online and take a look at our site. That's what he's capable of. Please, if you have an idea, go to disteldesign.com. That's DISTEL design.com. Hi, Brian from the NewAmericanMedia.com. You know, this housing crisis that we've been in for a few years now has really taken a toll on a lot of families. I know somebody you've worked with, somebody that you're related to, maybe even yourself. You might have gone through some sort of foreclosure, short sale, deed in lieu of foreclosure, or any other nonsense going on in the financial markets tied to housing. One of the things that is not talked about enough is the fact that a lot of people have to get rid of their homes right now and go into some sort of apartment-style living. And in that situation, many people can't bring their cat or dog, their friend, their companion, a member of their family. Imagine your dog, imagine your cat, dropped off at a shelter. Oh, it's a shelter. They'll be safe. No, the shelters just don't have the resources capable to take care of these animals, and thousands of them are put to death every single week. Please, if you have the opportunity, go become a foster parent at a shelter. Go to your local shelter, adopt a dog or cat. Trust me, a family out there is going to really appreciate the effort.